Today we are ranking the albums of Killswitch Engage, starting with Killswitch Engage in 2000. Now, despite feeling almost like a demo, I really enjoy this album and actually own a physical copy of the old pressing from Ferret Music. Had that since high school. It starts on some really solid foundations, and you've got tracks that later ended up on Alive or Just Breathing in kind of rougher form like Temple from Within and Vitae Infra, as well as Irreversible, which wound up on the End of Heartache. It's a really great starting point for a very important metalcore band, kind of an underrated release and rare example from a band in this genre from this era having a debut that I still go back to regularly. In fact, the Wikipedia states it was one of the first successful debut albums in metalcore, which I'd say tracks. Most of the other big names in the genre didn't really get much traction until their second album, although Poison the Well does come to mind. Also, apparently this entire album was written before Jesse joined as a vocalist to add his parts later. Metal Hammer named it in their top 20 metal albums of 2000. I'm going to put this one at great tier. They followed that up with Alive or Just Breathing in 2002. Now, this was the band's actual breakout album, moving to Roadrunner Records, starting off on a really heavy note with some strong, just classic songs. You've got Numbered Days with that incredible intro, Fixation on the Darkness, Just Barely Breathing, and Temple from Within. And then, of course, My Last Serenade was my jam for a very long time and still is. Really just a great song with both killer heavy scream-along verses and catchy sing-along choruses. I actually remember watching the music video for this one first time back in the day. Every song on this thing is just fantastic, and I also love this earlier, still kind of raw production. It's a step up from the self-titled, but still maintains this very bleak atmosphere to it. Great job, as usual, from Adam on that front. Just an amazing album that is just as strong to this day, if not more than it was back then. My personal favorite album from Killswitch Engage, it's the one I listened to the most, is going to perfection. Next was The End of Heartache in 2004. The first album with Howard Jones after Jesse initially leaving, and I was kind of iffy about Howard at first because I really liked Jesse, but I do think Howard really proved himself on this album, and for my money, this is his best. A lot of people even argue that this is the best Killswitch Engage album, and I like it a little bit less than Alive or Just Breathing, but they are very close, and of the two, this is probably the catchier album. This is where they really kind of stepped up the melodic side of everything that they were doing. I feel a lot more of the kind of Gothenburgy guitar harmonies as opposed to just the sort of brute strength, brute force approach. We also get a feature from Jesse Leach on Take This Oath, as well as All That Remains Filibante on Hope Is. Very consistent, but some really standout tracks too, like A Bid Farewell, personal favorite Rose of Sharon, the title track, and even beyond that, though the deeper cuts are fantastic. This is also going to perfection. They followed that up with As Daylight Dies in 2006. Now, this may end up being the hot take of this list because I think that this album is a bit overrated.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
I know, a lot of people love this one, but to me, it feels like they were just sort of at peak popularity, and I think that fed into the hype, and as I revisit this one, I don't think it holds up as well as those last three. That said, remember, overrated does not mean bad. There are still some really solid standout tracks on here. Solid opening title track, Unbroken, Still Beats Your Name, Break the Silence, Reject Yourself, and of course, My Curse is excellent. It also reminds me of good times playing Guitar Hero and Rock Band a lot in college. But for every great track, there's a really kind of mediocre track. It's also just kind of sappy and melodramatic, and hey, that's always been kind of part of Killswitch Engage's MO. All these very dramatic, kind of romantically tinged songs, but here I feel like we kind of tip over in it sort of being lame at times. I know there's going to be people who disagree, but with me, ultimately, I am going to put this one at good tier. I could maybe make a case for great, but I don't like it quite as much as the self-titled, so that's where it is for now.
Prove me wrong, kids. Prove me wrong.
And again, as we continue, these are just my opinions. There is no objective ranking of any band, if you ask me. Feel free to share your own rankings, your agreements and disagreements down in the comments. But continuing on, we have Killswitch Engage in 2009. Kind of confusing when a band already has a self-titled and then they put out another self-titled later in their career, but here we are. And sadly, a super generic album, if you ask me. There are some catchy parts like Save Me and strong opener Never Again. Starting Over is also fairly solid, but then there's also a lot of dull and middling stuff, especially in the second half. Somebody I came across referred to this album and its production as flaccid, and I think that that is the perfect description. It's not terrible, just kind of a weaker imitation of old ideas, a Xerox of a Xerox, to use the metaphor yet again. I do think that it's easily worse than As Daylight Dies. I'm apparently not the only hater too, as this is the lowest fan-rated album on Metal Storm. It is going to meh. I also really hate that cover art, but that's not really factored into the grade. I just think it's kind of lame. But after that, we got Disarm the Descent in 2013. 4-year gap between that self-titled and this album, and with Jesse making a return on vocals. Again, I love Howard, but I just always found myself more drawn to Jesse's style.
Racist.
For some reason, I was kind of rough on this album when it first came out, but the more I came back to it, the more I started to love it. Lots of great catchy songs like The Hell in Me, Beyond the Flames, The New Awakening, A Tribute to the Fallen, and of course, In Due Time, which is, in my opinion, easily their strongest single since My Curse and was even nominated for a Grammy. Also love Turning Point, The Call, and All We Have with that super heavy intro. Just a riff machine and very retro feeling album right down to that cover art too. It's just sort of that quintessential 2000s metalcore cover art. It reminds me of the first two albums actually. Great return, hit number 7 on Billboard 200 and number 1 on the rock charts. It is going to fantastic. Then we got Incarnate in 2016. Now, unfortunately, this is another one that I'm just like, blah. It's bland, it's generic. I would give this one the similar flaccid criticism that I did with the self-titled, except I think that this one has fewer moments that I like. At least that one had a strong opener and a few standouts I enjoy going back to. This one pretty much falls flat for me across the board, and tracks like Cut Me Loose are honestly kind of bad, in my opinion. Reminds me of the same complaints I have about All That Remains, lesser material. I feel like in terms of riffs, they were also going for kind of a bluesy Lamb of God influence, but it ends up feeling off-brand and like another cheap imitation. Until the Day and The Great Deceit are at least kind of okay, but this one is also going to meh. Then we got Atonement in 2019. Fortunately, I think that they rallied again big time with this one, even in spite of Jesse having to do vocal therapy for scar tissue he had developed in his throat. And it was also their first now through Metal Blade Records. The opener, Unleash, was again nominated for a Grammy, and from there we get The Signal Fire with both Jesse and Howard on vocals and some serious riffage, and love the appropriately thrashy The Crownless King featuring vocals from Testament's Chuck Billy. More great tracks in As Sure the Sun Will Rise, Ravenous, Don't Bite the Hand That Feeds, and Know Your Enemy with those sick harmonized guitars. Even softer stuff like I Can't Be the Only One and I Am Broken Too end up being catchy, more on par with songs from The End of Heartache. Some points off for the incredibly reused song titles, but the music is great and the runtime is very tight. I'm also going to put this one at fantastic. Which brings us to This Consequence in 2025. Can't believe it's already been like 6 years since the last album. Admittedly, I was not especially wowed by the singles going into this one, but after enjoying that last one so much, I wanted to keep an open mind. I Believe in particular just felt kind of paint by numbers, and after initially being excited to press play, I just found myself being kind of like, Sufficiently heavy opener though in Abandon Us with those chuggy guitars and relatively catchy chorus. It definitely brings that old Killswitch Engage flavor, albeit not quite reaching the same level as the classics. Forever Aligned was my preference of the two singles, getting some pretty strong Alive or Just Breathing vibes in both the performances and production. This, Aftermath, and Where It Dies became personal favorites.
It's you.
Similar energy with Discordant Nation and The Fall of Us, though the songwriting feels kind of clunkier, and I don't find myself getting caught up in it like I feel like I should. I'd say that Broken Glass is my least favorite, just pretty dull, and although I do like the deeper growls on Collusion, that one doesn't do a whole lot for me either. Fortunately, Requiem makes for a solid enough closer, and one I see myself coming back to a lot more. The best way I can summarize this one is that it's like they successfully captured all of the elements that got me into them in the 2000s, but without any of the oomph factor. I can praise it on a cognitive level, but it's just not doing much for me in the more visceral sense. I'd say I'm just getting old, but with how much I enjoyed the latest All That Remains and Bleeding Through albums, I don't really think that's it.
We're not too old for this shit.
Still, I think it's stronger than some of the other albums here, fairly consistent, nice brevity, and it might be a grower. But for now, I am putting this at good, and after listening to it, I decided I am going to bump up As Daylight Dies to great tier. Y'all check out this playlist for more metalcore rankings, including the new Bleeding Through and All That Remains updates. Also, stay tuned, I'm going to be doing a lot more. This is going to be a big year for metalcore. We've got Shadows Fall coming, I'll be doing one for that for the first time, and then also stuff like Architects. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.